So I felt like talking a bit off the cuff about Resident Evil 4. I've just beaten the game, and I've also taken the time to beat Mercenaries, or at least unlock all the stages and characters, which took me about probably less than an hour. That's beating Mercenaries, not beating the whole game. That was a lot longer. Point is, Resident Evil 4 is actually pretty goddamn good. It's easily Capcom's best game to me since Devil May Cry 5, and personally I'd say I enjoyed it a hell of a lot more than pretty much any of the Resident Evil games I've made since the original 4. So that's pretty high praise. That said, much like Devil May Cry 5, I have some conflicted feelings about it. First of all, the big question, did they just make one of the best action games of all time better? My answer was actually no, or at least not in a lot of ways. In certain ways, it definitely does gain some things. I'm pretty keen on the knife. It's a lot funner to use now. You can parry attacks with it. It feels just like a ton of fun to mess about with. Also, the new crossbow weapon is kind of an interesting decision. It's a weapon which lets you constantly save on ammo, since as long as you hit an enemy and kill an enemy after you hit it with the crossbow, you can regain all the ammo you use from it. Both are sort of interesting additions and allow you to save on ammo at the expense of riskier play. So there you go, that's some praise there. Let's talk about what I wasn't so keen on. Well, first of all, one of the biggest things I was dubious as soon as they mentioned was side quests. And as far as I'm concerned, I was proven completely correct. The side quests are shit. That's put bluntly. Okay, there's one or two good ones, which are like where you'll go back to an old area and kill a more powerful version of a standard enemy for some, like, gems. A ton of others are things like go shoot 4 rats in this area. This isn't good. There are other stuff like go find this specific item and sell it. All of them are basically full of bullshit. And it's like the ones which I'll give credit to, like the more powerful enemies, they could have just been placed in the game. You could have just killed this enemy by going back to an old area and gotten a gem. There's no need to include them, bluntly. I think ideas like being able to find and shoot all the rats aren't necessarily terrible, but I don't know, just make it so Leon can eat the rats or something. That would be more interesting than having to find 4 rats in different areas and shoot them all. Point is, side quests aren't a huge waste of time in that they do get you upgrades, but that's the point. They shouldn't. This design is bad. This is bad design, and it's a design thing the original 4 didn't really have. This is RPG bullshit design, and yeah, if you're one of those guys who has like a ton of RPGs in their favourite games, maybe you'll like this because, you know, it's making the game longer. Thing is, I'm in my 30s, early 30s. I don't particularly like wasting my time on something which isn't interesting to do just because it rewards me with weapon upgrades. I'd sooner just have not had them. The Assignment Ada extra in the original GameCube version, not the Separate Ways campaign, the Assignment Ada, which was like an hour long, added far more value to that original release than any of the side quests or all the side quests combined. In fact, put simply, the few good side quests don't make up for the bad ones, so there's my biggest personal issue. Can you ignore them? Yeah, they're side quests. Point is, if you're playing on the hardest setting like I was, you'll probably want to do them all just to gain any advantage you can. So I just didn't appreciate this aspect. To me, treasure hunting was probably the biggest weak point in the original Resident Evil. You didn't really hunt treasure, you just looked on a map, it marked it for you and you picked it up. It's the same here, you buy the map, you find all the treasure and you pick it all up. Not terrible, but one of the weaker aspects. In terms of something I did like, I really appreciate weapon switching. Once again, biggest issue with the original, constantly pausing to switch weapons. Here, you quickly switch through just arrows on the D-pad and you've got your new weapon. It's a shame you can't save specific setouts, because another thing this game does well is that the case, it's actually useful. There are times where I actually found myself ignoring certain weapons in order to fit more in the case. Speaking of shooting and eating stuff, at one point I found a pool of fish in the castle, shot them all, put them all in my case, and had a big health supply at the expense of having to limit what weapons I was using. this is an issue I had with Resident Evil Village 8. That game, I never felt like there was even much point in the case. I always just had about enough cash to upgrade it, and as long as I wasn't like purposely carrying around shitty weapons, the case never became a strategic issue. Here, the case actually does feel like a helpful aspect of the game, something you actually do have to think about, rather than just something which is there because, oh, it should be. So that's something I can say is carried over from the original. It is more forgiving in that you can just send your weapons to vendors' inventory and just get them back at no cost whenever you find you've got too much stuff. But you can't send everything into a drop box, which I think is good because it does avoid the player being able to manipulate the sort of assist that Resident Evil 4 is known for. E.g., the game will throw you health and ammo if you don't have health and ammo more often. So yeah, it's a nicely thought out system, so credit to that. Let's talk about, is it the same game though? And the answer is not really. It's basically a different game with some of the same areas. That's how I describe it. Some places have completely gone, others have been added. Do I think it's better? Not really. Like I said, I feel like the game does ruin a bit of the purity of the original. With so a good example of this is that while I like the knife, and in the original you got armor, you can go back to the merchant at any point to fully restock your knife and armor. And this is a thing the original didn't do. You couldn't restock ammo, and it kept it a game where it's focused on forward momentum. Here you can actually enter some of these big encounters, kill a few enemies, run back to a checkpoint, the enemies are still dead, and you can just go restock all your armor. So once again, it's encouraging you to spend more time, which if you care about rank, I guess you could argue that, hey, you emphasize to skip all the side content or this kind of play style. But my point is, if you don't care about rank, the game has added a lot more obvious exploits to make it which, you know, I'm always in favour of the most interesting way to play the game should also be the most beneficial one. So a game where you are encouraged to run back through whole chunks of stage just to restock, I think is a bad design decision. At least it doesn't let you buy ammo. Hey, that's something. So, do I have much more to say? Well, I guess I could address the infamous woke question, so to speak. I feel in a weird contrarian way I want to give these weirdos some credit. They may be developmentally disabled, they may have an unhealthy obsession with children, they may unironically agree with a lot of like far-right propaganda. Yeah, there's a lot wrong with you know, we had this thing, you know, Japan, the idol industry, these weirdos who, you know, got emotionally obsessed with shit which obviously should only be intended for very young children, and then it got all creepy because they couldn't bear this idea that adult women were having. Point is, there's a lot of reasons I don't take these fuckers seriously, but I do want to give them some credit, because believe it or not, I do have an issue with a lot of overly PC, or should I say, I guess the best way to say it is that going through Dead Space and Resident Evil 4, I noticed it. I noticed how some changes had been made, which kinda, in the case of this, actually did take away from some aspects I liked. In Dead Space, it was just simply, within 2 minutes of starting, one character has casually confirmed that she's a lesbian, which it's not like I object to it, but it's just weird to notice it because it doesn't contribute anything to the plot. People can bitch and cry about The Last of Us 2 till the cows come home. That was a game where everything felt pretty well sorry about that interruption. Back on track. Yeah, the point is, Resident Evil 4 has very obviously been kind of written with ideas of character development, more rounded characters, more respectful treatment of certain characters, less problematic, and for the most part I'd say it's mildly a step down. like mildly. Resident Evil 4 wasn't a game where I felt the story was particularly important. It was really just an excuse for the action, and that's fine. That's what it should be. It doesn't really matter. A bad story really isn't that big a deal to me in a game. I think when people complain about bad stories, they like, what are you? Are you playing a visual novel? Because those tend to be bad stories, but they're also extremely obnoxiously long. So yeah, I can see how a bad story would be a problem in that. Point is, Resident Evil 4's narrative has been kind of mildly reworked, mostly in terms of just how the dialogue is. There are additions here and there. The game is obviously setting up a bigger conflict, and it seems like they go in for the idea of remaking the whole series, maybe even in a different order in certain regards. There's literally that MCU stinger at the end where you get the preview of next time. Here's a brief scene showing some characters talking to set up the next entry in the next adventure. Which I don't really mind, but a big thing I find weird is there's this clear attempt to flesh things out and it doesn't always work. The most obvious one is Ashley. Ashley in the original, like all the characters in it, didn't have that much depth. Now her and Leon have kind of a bit of an arc going where she's meant to get more competent. I guess that's the idea. Problem is it's not really shown in the plot at all. All she still does is mostly get kidnapped and scream, which would be okay if it weren't for the fact that the game wants you to believe she's a bit more capable than that, but she's not. Do you remember that big scene at the end of the original on the boat where she kind of flirts with Leon and he basically says nah? It's still sort of here, only now she kind of pushes the idea of, oh, could you be my personal bodyguard? And he says something like, no, I think after what you've done, you've shown you're perfectly capable of anything people can throw at you. And it's like, no, she's not. She still comes across as all she could do is scream and get kidnapped. What she does is some very minor thing to help Leon near the end, which anyone with basic, like, physical capabilities could probably do. It doesn't earn itself at all, and it feels like it's there because they recognise how poorly she got treated in the original and wanted to give her something. I don't really take a huge issue with it, it's just notably unearned. Then there's Ada, who I have no opinion on. To me, the whole Ada thing doesn't matter because I never really thought about her voice or her performance because she's such a minor character, and she was a minor in the original also, but I don't know, I'll wait till the Ada expansion comes to actually have an opinion on that. Then there's the actual one I do find that bugs me, and that's Ramon. You know, the little tiny kid-like guy, only now he looks like kind of an old man, and it's a lot less creepy. I feel like they realised there was something uncomfortable about, like, blowing the shit out of someone who looked about 7. But I thought that was cool. It added sort of a creepy element to his design. And yeah, I get Resident Evil isn't really hardcore disturbing horror or anything, but there was some fun in that kind of gratuitous sort of character design where it feels like it's going for being a bit offensive and weird. And that's not there anymore, and Ramon generally disappoints me in that way. So do I have much else to say about Resident Evil 4? Well, I would say it's probably my favourite Capcom game in these new Resident Evils. And yeah, it does do a lot well. For one thing, I feel like it has a core solid gameplay novelty. This was something I found was very lacking from 7 or 8. Both felt like I wasn't sure what it was going for its core sort of gameplay, so to speak. Like, Resident Evil 8 in particular is just a game of tons of styles. There's a whole chunk where that game is just walking sim, and it feels so weird in how it bundles about. This has these very solid enemy encounter areas, a ton of great bosses. There's a lot to like here. I just don't think it has the purity of design of the original. and that is a shame, but hey, it's still a massive, solid action game, and I'd recommend it to anyone who wants one of those.